The crystal glass shattered against Italian marble, not from my hands but from his. Richard Pemberton III, CEO of Pemberton Global, stared at me like death itself had walked into his boardroom wearing a cleaning uniform. He had no idea how right he was. But you won't believe how this story actually began, or why one word in Arabic would destroy a billion-dollar empire and expose the darkest family secret imaginable. It didn't start with glass breaking or secrets unraveling. It started, as the most devastating revenge stories do, with a job interview that seemed perfectly innocent. The Pemberton Global Tower pierced Manhattan's skyline like a steel and glass monument to corporate greed. 47 floors of polished stone, mahogany and money, built on foundations that would soon crumble under the weight of one woman's determination for justice. I adjusted my blazer as I entered the executive floor, knowing this moment would change everything. Hidden in my jacket was surveillance equipment, the first of many devices I'd use to document what was about to become a psychological war. So, Aaliyah Mitchell. Richard barely glanced up from my resume, but I was already capturing every word. His office was a shrine to excess, Persian rugs worth more than most people's homes, oil paintings that belonged in museums, and a mahogany desk that had probably cost 6 figures. Georgetown University, summa cum laude, Masters in International Finance, Military Intelligence, 2 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, security clearance higher than most senators, fluent in 5 languages, including Arabic and Somali. His pale blue eyes, so familiar though he had no idea why, finally lifted to meet mine. The disgust was immediate and unconcealed. Impressive credentials for housekeeping work. The way he said housekeeping made it sound like a disease. What he didn't know was that I'd chosen this job for one very specific reason, and it had nothing to do with cleaning and everything to do with justice. I needed steady employment, sir. Your company has an excellent reputation. That laugh, sharp, dismissive, with a wheeze at the end that made my skin crawl. It was a sound I'd heard before, in family stories told by my dying mother. Well, we'll see if you can adapt to our standards here. This isn't government work. We expect excellence, not diversity quotas. And remember, this is a professional environment. We maintain certain expectations about conduct and appearance. His eyes lingered on my natural hair, my clothes, my very existence in his pristine white world. Every word was chosen with surgical precision, legally defensible, morally poisonous, and designed to make me feel inferior from day one. I should have walked away. Instead, I smiled and shook his hand, sealing what would become years of carefully orchestrated psychological warfare that would ultimately destroy his empire, expose his crimes, and reveal a family secret that would shatter both our worlds forever. But here's what Richard Pemberton III didn't know as he hired his own destruction. I wasn't there by accident. And the woman sitting across from him wasn't just another desperate job seeker. She was his worst nightmare in human form. Day 1 became week 1. Week 1 became month, one of the most sophisticated campaign of workplace harassment I'd ever witnessed. And I was documenting every illegal second of it. "Clean it again!" Richard's voice sliced through his executive office like a blade. I was already polishing his conference table for the 4th time that morning, each stroke perfect, but perfection was never the point. Control was, domination was. Making me feel less than human was the daily goal. "The wood grain still shows fingerprints," he said, not looking up from his Wall Street Journal. "Perhaps you're unfamiliar with proper cleaning techniques, different cultural approaches to cleanliness, I imagine. And please enunciate. I can barely understand that dialect of yours." Every insult was calculated. Every humiliation documented on hidden microphones he had no idea I was carrying. But what would happen when he discovered the truth about who I really was? When he learned that the woman he was torturing daily shared his blood? The harassment had patterns. Mornings were for impossible cleaning standards. Afternoons were for public humiliation. Evenings were for tasks designed to keep me there past reasonable hours, ensuring I had no life beyond his sadistic entertainment. When I brought coffee, made exactly to specifications I'd memorized, it was always too bitter or too sweet or unacceptably lukewarm. When I passed his office, he'd conspicuously close his door, as if my mere presence contaminated the air. During meetings, he'd make jokes about urban efficiency and cultural work ethics, while I cleaned around his colleagues like invisible furniture. "Aaliyah," he'd call out during board meetings, his voice carrying across the room like a whip crack. "Come demonstrate your unique approach to window cleaning." I'm sure our international clients would find it educational. The board members would shift uncomfortably, but none ever spoke up. Money silences conscience faster than anything else in corporate America. They watched a powerful man systematically dehumanize an employee and chose profit over principles every single time. But I noticed something, tiny cracks in his armor. When I mentioned my military service, he'd pause for just a heartbeat. When his cruelty was particularly vicious, his hand would shake slightly as he reached for his bourbon. By month 3, he was drinking earlier each day. What Richard Pemberton III didn't understand was that this mouse was actually a lion in disguise. And lions don't forget. They wait. They plan. They gather evidence. And when the time is right, they devour their prey completely. 6 months in, Richard decided private humiliation wasn't enough. He needed an audience for my destruction. He needed witnesses to his power and my powerlessness. He needed everyone in that building to understand exactly where I stood in his carefully constructed racial hierarchy. "Security! Security to the executive floor, immediately!" His voice cracked through the gleaming lobby like a fire alarm, echoing off walls designed to intimidate and impress. I stood frozen in the executive elevator, my keycard still in hand. The same card I'd used without issue for months. The same card that was about to become evidence in a federal case. My documentation tools captured every word of what happened next. And later, FBI agents would listen to this conversation with growing horror at the casual institutional nature of his harassment. "Why is the help using the executive elevator?" Richard gestured at me like I was some kind of contamination. "This elevator is for executives and VIP clients, not maintenance personnel." Marcus Williams, the head of security, a decent man trapped in an impossible position, shifted uncomfortably in his uniform. "Sir, she has proper clearance. Her keycard is programmed for all floors, including executive access. I don't care what some computer system says. Look at her. Does she look like executive material to you? From this moment forward, she uses the service elevator, in the back, with the other support staff." The lobby fell silent. 20 people watched as a billionaire CEO publicly humiliated and demoted an employee, not for her work, but because of who she was. 20 witnesses to power wielded through prejudice in its most undeniable form. He stepped closer, his breath hot against my ear as he whispered words meant just for me. "Time you learned your proper place in the natural order of things." But I saw it again, that momentary flicker in his eyes. Uncertainty. As if some part of him knew this was wrong, even as he did it. That became my new reality. Industrial cleaning chemicals and broken air conditioning replaced marble and mahogany. Kitchen entrances replaced the main doors. All while Richard chipped away at my humanity, piece by piece, day by day. But here's what he didn't know. I already knew my proper place. And soon, very soon, he would learn his. And finally, this was it, the final straw. Richard burst into the conference room as if he'd stumbled upon toxic waste, his face contorted in exaggerated disgust. I was arranging quarterly reports for the afternoon board meeting, each document precisely aligned according to seating charts I'd long since memorized. I'd eaten lunch with my Somali neighbor Amina, sambusas and rice laced with cardamom. A small act of comfort, of cultural preservation in this corporate wasteland of Wonder Bread and mayonnaise. The spices were faint on my clothes, barely noticeable, but Richard had a talent for sniffing out anything that didn't fit his narrow definition of acceptable. "I apologize, sir." "No, don't apologize. Don't change a thing." His smile turned predatory, hungry for the humiliation about to unfold. "Leave it. Let our board members experience the full cultural diversity of our staff, educational opportunity." Executives filtered in, grey suits, grey hair, grey souls. And with the confidence of a man who believed his small-minded cruelty was not just tolerated but quietly applauded, Richard made his announcement. "Gentlemen, if you notice any exotic aromas, don't be alarmed. Our cleaning staff has been exploring some tribal dietary customs. How fascinating that you people maintain those primitive traditions even here in civilized society." The room's temperature seemed to plummet, uncomfortable shifting around the mahogany table. But I noticed it. Mr. Stevens from legal frowning in quiet disapproval, Williams from international looking genuinely disturbed, and Richard. His hand was trembling as he reached for his water glass. Richard was growing bolder, sloppier, more convinced his arrogance was untouchable, less careful about witnesses, and I was capturing every poisonous word, stacking them like dominoes, waiting for the perfect moment to tip them over. What he didn't realize was that every escalation brought him closer. Closer to the day his carefully built empire would implode. Closer to the moment when the truth about who I was would hit him so hard he'd never recover. The Pemberton Global Christmas Gala was corporate excess incarnate. Crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's annual salaries, wine that sold for hundreds per bottle, an orchestra flown in from Vienna, and enough caviar to feed a small village. I was there to serve, invisible in my uniform, documenting their casual cruelty, while dressed-up monsters celebrated another year of exploitation and profit. The surveillance equipment hidden throughout my uniform captured every conversation, every racist joke, every casual admission of illegal activity. The ballroom was a monument to wealth and power, polished stone floors that reflected 1,000 lights, gold-leafed walls that had witnessed decades of deals and deceptions, and oil paintings of Pemberton ancestors who had built this empire on the backs of people they considered inferior. Aaliyah. Richard's voice boomed across the ballroom, cutting through Vivaldi like a chainsaw through silk. "Come here, dear." Every conversation stopped. Every champagne glass paused halfway to lips. Every eye in that room focused on me as I crossed that gleaming floor. My reflection multiplied infinitely in mirrors that had reflected 3 generations of Pemberton cruelty. Richard stood at the center of it all, drunk on expensive champagne and his own power, surrounded by politicians, business leaders, and society figures who would later claim they had no idea what kind of person he really was. "Ladies and gentlemen, our most colorful employee, years of remarkable dedication, wouldn't you say?" The alcohol had stripped away his usual careful racism, leaving only the raw, ugly truth of what he believed about people like me. His voice carried across crystal and marble, ensuring maximum audience for my humiliation. "Tell them about yourself, Aaliyah. Your background. Your origins." "I'm from Washington, D.C., sir." "No, no, no." He wagged a finger like he was correcting a child. "Before that, your roots, your people. How interesting that you still move with that distinctive, primitive grace. Almost like something from a nature documentary about, well, you know." The ballroom went deadly silent. Even his enablers looked shocked. Patricia Pemberton, his wife of 30 years, materialized at his elbow like an avenging angel in designer dress. "Richard, darling," her voice was ice wrapped in silk, "perhaps we should—" "I'm just making conversation. Anthropological interest in how you people—" Something inside me finally snapped. Years of deliberate humiliation, and now public degradation in front of Manhattan's elite. The hidden microphones captured what happened next, and later, civil rights lawyers would call it the most powerful moment of testimony they'd ever heard. "Actually, Mr. Pemberton," I said, my voice cutting through champagne-soaked silence like a sword, "this person managed intelligence operations that saved American lives, earned advanced degrees while working nights to pay for school, and holds security clearance you'll never qualify for despite your billions. But thank you for the anthropological assessment." His face cycled through red, then purple, then a shade of rage I didn't know human skin could achieve. "How dare you speak to me like— Richard?" Patricia's voice could have frozen hell itself. "You will apologize now, or this conversation becomes very public and very expensive." The threat hung in perfumed air like smoke from expensive cigars. Everyone in that room understood the implications. Lawsuit, media coverage, federal investigations, the kind of attention that destroys careers and reputations. But his prejudice was stronger than his business sense. He leaned close, whispering words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "This isn't over. I'll destroy you, quietly, professionally. You'll never work in this city again, and when I'm done, you'll understand why your kind belongs in the gutter where I found you." He couldn't fire me. Not with witnesses, not with his wife's threat hanging over him like a sword, but he could make the following months a living hell designed to break me completely. What Richard Pemberton didn't realize was that I was already broken by watching my mother die alone, while he lived in luxury that should have been shared with family. Broken by years of poverty, while our inheritance funded his empire. Broken by the knowledge that the man methodically destroying me was supposed to be my protector. You can't break someone who's already shattered. You can only give them reasons to become something harder, something more dangerous, something capable of complete and total revenge. The cleaning woman doesn't understand business. Richard's familiar voice carried across his conference table as he addressed Saudi business partners. I continued pouring imported spring water, invisible in my uniform, while he casually discussed what would become the biggest financial fraud case in corporate history. The meeting was supposed to be about legitimate energy investments, solar panels for refugee camps, water purification systems for disaster zones, infrastructure development for emerging markets, humanitarian projects that would have helped millions while generating billions in profits. But here's what this billionaire never bothered to learn about his simple cleaning lady. Military intelligence had required fluency in 5 languages, including perfect Arabic. I understood every word of the criminal conspiracy unfolding around that mahogany table. The Syrian project, flexible timeline, yes? My hand remained steady, despite rage building in my chest like molten metal. Military training had taught me to maintain operational security while gathering intelligence on enemy targets, and Richard Pemberton had just become an enemy of the state. Very flexible. Infrastructure takes time. Sometimes complications arise. Sheikh Abdullah al-Rashid nodded gravely. And oversight in the region? Richard's smile was identical to the one he used on me daily. Limited, very limited, difficult to verify, details, in such remote locations. My heart screamed, but my face remained neutral as I refilled water glasses and listened to them plan to steal money meant to save lives. Every euphemism was being captured on multiple devices hidden throughout my uniform. Every coded phrase that meant millions diverted from desperate families. The conversation continued for 2 hours. Ministers discussed like commodities, investigations mentioned like weather patterns, international aid money treated like personal profit margins, Bangladesh flood relief, Somalia medical supplies, Afghan school construction, all discussed in the language of flexible timelines and regional complications. Then Sheikh Abdullah mentioned something that made my blood freeze. Last year's family crisis. Your assistance was invaluable. Richard nodded solemnly. Banking difficulties, regional instabilities. Sometimes unfortunate delays occur despite best intentions. Every evil thing he'd done suddenly connected in a horrifying pattern of greed disguised as humanitarian aid. But what happened next would begin his total destruction and reveal the family secret that would shatter both our worlds. Time for the first revelation that would begin his complete annihilation. I interrupted their Arabic conversation. "Forgive me, but didn't your nephew go missing last year? A kidnapping?" The conference room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on Persian carpet that cost more than most people's cars. Sheikh Abdullah's face turned to stone. "What did you just say?" Richard drained of all color, his pale skin becoming nearly translucent. "She doesn't understand. She's just—" I continued in perfect Arabic. "I understand every word. Your nephew Rashid, taken in Dubai. The family paid ransom, but there were banking complications." The Sheikh's eyes locked on Richard with growing horror. "That's impossible. You assured me the delays were unavoidable. You said Richard was visibly shaking, sweat beading on his forehead. Business is complex, regional banking, sometimes delays. You caused my nephew's death for money. The slap echoed like a gunshot across gleaming stone and mahogany. You destroyed my family for profit, but I wasn't finished destroying him, not even close. There's more, those humanitarian projects, the flexible timelines, the regional complications. Millions that never reach the families who needed them. Water systems that exist only on paper. Medical supplies sold to private buyers. Schools built in boardrooms but never in villages. The sheikh trembled with righteous rage. How do you know these details? Because I've been documenting every conversation, every euphemism, every crime disguised as business complexity, building a federal case, waiting for the perfect moment to watch your empire crumble into dust. I looked directly at Richard, switching to English so everyone would understand. Every insult while you stole food from children's mouths. The other partners were backing toward the door, understanding that they'd witnessed something that would destroy careers and end in federal prison sentences. But Richard wasn't done being destroyed. Not yet. "Security!" Richard shouted, his voice cracking with pure panic. "Get her out of here. She's recording confidential." "That won't help you now." My voice was calm, controlled, exactly like it had been during military operations when everything was falling apart. "Evidence is already with the FBI and the Washington Post and Al Jazeera and the State Department and every civil rights organization in America." Richard's legs gave out completely. He grabbed for the conference table, but his hands were shaking too badly to find purchase. Crystal glasses and imported water bottles flew across the room, echoing the sound that began this story. "No, this can't. Who sent you? Corporate espionage? Foreign government? Competitors trying to steal?" "Nobody sent me, Uncle Richard." The words hit him like a physical blow. His face cycled through confusion, recognition, dawning horror, and complete denial in the space of 3 heartbeats. "Uncle? What are you? Who are you calling?" This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The revelation that would destroy him more completely than any federal investigation, any criminal trial, any prison sentence ever could. I smiled, exactly like my mother's smile from the family photographs he'd thrown away 40 years ago. Elizabeth Pemberton was my mother. Remember Elizabeth, your little sister, the one you disowned for marrying my father? Who died in a charity hospice while you collected yachts and bought politicians, while I was serving you water, listening as you treated people like me as beneath you. The conference room had become a tomb. Not a sound except Richard's labored breathing as 20 years of careful composure shattered completely. No, that's impossible. Elizabeth couldn't have children. The doctors said it would be difficult, not impossible. She had 2 daughters before complications made more children impossible. I'm the oldest. Sarah lives in California. We're both the nieces you refused to acknowledge while you wore our inheritance. I pointed to the vintage Pemberton watch on his wrist, our great-grandfather's timepiece, a family heirloom that should have been divided between all the grandchildren. Sheikh Abdullah stared between us, seeing the family resemblance for the first time. Same ice-blue eyes, same stubborn chin, same aristocratic nose that had been passed down through 4 generations of Pemberton blood. Unbelievable. Your family? You're his blood relative? And he treats you like this? Was family, I corrected in Arabic, then switched back to English. He made sure we stopped being family when he decided his precious bloodline was too pure for black contamination. Days later, while FBI agents seized his assets and federal marshals secured his properties, I was cleaning out my mother's small apartment in a neighborhood he wouldn't have been caught visiting. Behind her jewelry box, a modest wooden case that held more love than his millions ever could, I found the sealed envelope that would complete Richard's total destruction. Faded paper, my name in her careful handwriting, the final piece of truth that would annihilate him completely. My dearest Aaliyah, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if you're angry about Richard, please try to understand the whole truth before you judge either of us too harshly. There's something that changes everything, baby. Something I never told you because I hoped he'd find his humanity before it became necessary. Richard isn't just your uncle, sweetheart. He's your legal guardian. I named him your godfather and guardian in my will when you were born. According to legal documents filed in New York family court, he's been responsible for you since you turned 18. Every day you struggled, every night you went hungry, every dollar you needed for college, he was legally obligated to provide. He was your guardian, your protector, your ward in every way that mattered. Every cruel insult he threw at you, he threw at the child under his care. Every humiliation he put you through, he put his ward through. While you worked multiple jobs and fought for scholarships and slept on friends' couches, you were his responsibility. The safety deposit box at First National contains all the legal documents. Box 447. The key is taped under this jewelry case. Make him face this truth, baby. Not for revenge, but for redemption. Show him what his prejudice truly cost. Not just money or reputation, but the chance to be the guardian he was legally bound to be. All my love forever, Mom P.S. That watch he wears belonged to your great-grandfather. It was supposed to be divided between all the grandchildren. I left my share to Richard, hoping he'd realize you existed, hoping he'd find you and make things right. I never imagined he'd torture his own ward while wearing her inheritance. My hands shook as I read it multiple times, tears blurring words that rewrote everything I thought I knew about family, law, and the depth of Richard's betrayal. He wasn't just the uncle who'd disowned his sister. He was my appointed guardian. While calling me subhuman, I had been his legal responsibility. I found Richard in his penthouse apartment, packing personal items under FBI supervision. Federal agents had seized everything: bank accounts, properties, vehicles, art collections, even his clothes. But they allowed him to keep photographs and documents before sentencing. The apartment was a monument to wealth and loneliness. $1,000,000 views of Manhattan, furniture that cost more than houses, and not a single photograph of family anywhere to be seen. "Aaliyah," he said without looking up from a box of papers. His voice was different, smaller, less commanding. "I wondered when you'd come. To see the ruins, I suppose. Did you know you were my guardian? That Mom named you legally responsible for me? That while you called me an animal, I was under your care?" The box slipped from his hands. Legal documents scattered across polished floors like autumn leaves, and among them I could see contracts worth hundreds of millions, all worthless now. "What are you talking about?" I handed him the letter, watched his face crumble as understanding dawned like sunrise over a battlefield. "She never told me. 30 years of silence, and she never—" "She tried to tell you everything. Every letter you returned, every call you refused, every attempt at reconciliation you rejected. You were my appointed guardian, and you never knew because hatred consumed everything else." He sat heavily in his leather chair, the same chair where he'd signed papers that stole millions from humanitarian aid, where he'd planned my daily humiliations, where he'd built an empire on hatred and greed. "All those years, and you were struggling through college, working multiple jobs to survive, and you were supposed to protect me. Every scholarship I fought for alone, you should have provided. Every night I worked double shifts to afford food, you should have supported. Every door that closed in my face, you should have opened. Every time you made me eat in basements, you were failing the child entrusted to your care." The words hit him like physical blows. This wasn't just about money or even racism anymore. This was about a fundamental betrayal of legal and moral duty that went beyond anything the courts could punish. "I didn't know. You chose ignorance, because acknowledging my existence would have meant acknowledging that your pure bloodline had been contaminated, because white supremacist pride mattered more than family, more than law, more than basic human decency." Richard picked up one of the scattered photographs, him and my mother as children, building sandcastles at the Hamptons family estate that he'd inherited, and she'd been banned from visiting. "What happens now? What do you want from me?" "I want you to face the complete truth. You didn't just steal from refugees, you failed your ward. You didn't just torture some random black woman. You tortured the child under your protection. You let prejudice poison every decent instinct, even toward family you were legally bound to protect. Can you Is forgiveness possible? I thought about Mom's letter, about choosing healing over hatred, about redemption that had to be earned through actions, not just words. Ask me in 20 years, after you've spent every prison day thinking about the responsibility you abandoned, after you've made real amends to every family you destroyed, after you've looked in mirrors and acknowledged what hatred made you become. The federal prison was nothing like the marble and mahogany world Richard had inhabited for 60 years. Concrete walls, fluorescent lights, and the constant hum of broken air conditioning replaced his executive suite. I visited him 3 months after sentencing, finding a man who looked like he'd aged a decade in weeks. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by orange fabric that made his pale skin look almost transparent. But something else was different too. The arrogance that had defined him was cracking piece by piece. "You came," he said, sitting across from me at a metal table bolted to concrete floors. "I said I would. I've been thinking. About Mom, about you, about what I became." His voice was different, quieter, less certain. "There was another prisoner here. Marcus, served in Afghanistan, lost his leg to an IED. I waited, saying nothing. He was reading, struggling with the words. I offered to help. Richard's hands shook slightly as he spoke. When he found out who I was, what I'd done, he should have walked away, should have told me to rot in hell. But he didn't? No. He said something I can't stop thinking about, said hatred was a luxury poor people couldn't afford, but rich people never seem to outgrow, said maybe prison was the only place I'd ever learned to see people as people. It was a start, not redemption, not forgiveness, but a crack in the armor of prejudice that had defined his life. "I keep thinking about that Christmas gala," he continued. "The way I humiliated you in front of everyone, the way I justified it as somehow natural, normal. How did I become someone who could do that to another human being? To my own family?" "Slow choices," I said. "Small compromises. Daily decisions to see some people as less human than others. It builds up over time until cruelty feels like righteousness. Can it be undone? Can someone like me ever really change? I don't know, but I know someone who might have the answer." I told him about Marcus, about the kindness shown to someone who didn't deserve it, about the possibility that even the worst people could learn to be better if they were willing to do the hard work of changing. 6 months later, I visited again. This time, Richard was different, teaching literacy classes, helping other inmates write letters to families they'd abandoned, working in the prison garden, where he was learning that growth required patience, care, and the willingness to get his hands dirty. Marcus died last month, he told me. Heart attack. But before he died, he asked me to promise something. What? To keep teaching, to keep learning, to use whatever years I have left to make amends, even if forgiveness never comes. Richard looked directly at me, really looked at me, for maybe the first time in his life. He said the best way to honor people we've wronged is to become people worthy of their humanity. A year later, Richard stood before a federal judge, requesting permission to testify in victim impact hearings, not for early release, not for reduced sentences, but because families deserved to hear acknowledgement and truth from the man who had harmed them. 2 years later, the Pemberton Community Justice Center in Queens was packed with families, not billionaires or politicians, but real families torn apart by corporate greed and slowly, carefully healing through testimony, truth-telling, and the hard work of restoration. Richard stood at the podium in Prison Orange, granted special permission for victim impact hearings. The man who had once terrorized me looked smaller, humbler, broken in ways that might finally allow genuine healing to begin. "My name is Richard Pemberton III. I stole money meant to save lives. I destroyed families through fraud and racism. And I tortured the young woman who was my legal responsibility because I let hatred override every decent human instinct. Families from Syria, Bangladesh, Somalia, and Haiti listened with tears streaming down faces marked by loss and hope in equal measure. Next to them sat Sheikh Abdullah, who had flown from Dubai not for business, but to witness justice and healing. I cannot return what I took. Lives lost to preventable diseases, homes destroyed by preventable floods, children who suffered because medicine never reached refugee camps, the dignity I stole through calculated racism and legal neglect. His voice broke, and I saw him look directly at me in the audience. But I can give my remaining years to making amends and fighting the hatred that turned me into someone capable of such evil. I can tell my story so others don't walk the path that destroyed my family and hurt so many innocent people. After the hearing, as victims shared their own stories of loss and recovery, Richard approached me in shackles, flanked by federal marshals but somehow looking more human than he had in decades. How did I do? You told the truth. That's what matters now. Parole hearing is next month. I know, I'll be there. His eyes, so much like my mother's, so much like my own, filled with something I'd never seen before. Hope. Will you speak for me or against me? I considered the question carefully. This man who had failed me so completely, who had caused immeasurable pain and was finally genuinely trying to atone, who had learned from a dying veteran that redemption was possible even for people who had forgotten their humanity. For you, but only because Mum would have wanted it. Only because I've learned that compassion is stronger than cruelty. Only because Marcus taught you something I could never teach you myself. He smiled, genuine for the first time in memory, not the practiced CEO mask or the racist sneer, but something that looked almost like the uncle my mother had once loved. Your mother would be proud of who you became. She is proud, present tense, Uncle Richard, and she forgives you even if I'm not there yet. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences, it makes them bearable. Redemption doesn't mean escaping justice, it means accepting it with grace. The marshals began to lead him away, but he turned back one last time. The watch, he said suddenly. Great-grandfather's watch. It's in evidence lockup. When they release it, it's yours. Should have been yours from the beginning. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. As they led him back to federal prison, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. Years of calculated torture, decades of stolen family, millions stolen from the desperate, lives lost to greed and hatred, but also truth finally exposed, justice finally served, victims compensated from seized assets, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of healing that my mother had always believed was possible. That Marcus had shown was possible, even for someone as lost as Richard Pemberton III. 5 years later, the Elizabeth Pemberton Memorial Foundation operates from the same Manhattan tower where Richard once ruled his empire. But now the executive floors house refugee services, legal aid clinics, and programs that help families torn apart by corporate crimes. I wear great-grandfather's watch every day, not as a trophy but as a reminder that inheritance isn't just about money or heirlooms. It's about choosing which family legacy to continue and which to transform. Richard serves his time teaching literacy to fellow inmates and writing letters to the families he destroyed. Some forgive, some don't. All deserve the choice. Sarah, my sister, runs the Foundation's West Coast operations. We've reclaimed the Pemberton name, but on our terms, as a force for justice, not oppression. And sometimes late at night in the office that once witnessed my humiliation, I hear my mother's voice in the whisper of papers and the hum of computers. Show them that love is stronger than hate, baby. Show them that even the worst prejudice can't destroy what's good in human hearts. The crystal that shattered at the beginning of this story has been replaced 1,000 times over. But the lesson remains: some things need to break completely before they can be rebuilt into something better. Richard Pemberton III thought he was superior because of his skin color. He learned through the hardest possible lessons that the only thing that makes anyone superior is their capacity for love, justice, and redemption. And in the end, that's a lesson worth everything to teach. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, it's transformation. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't watching your enemy fall. It's helping them stand as the person they should have been all along. My name is Aaliyah Mitchell Pemberton. I am my mother's daughter, my father's pride, and yes, the ward my uncle failed. I am proof that hatred can't destroy what it fears most, the truth that we're all family, all human, all capable of both tremendous evil and transformative good. The choice is always ours, and I choose love, even when it hurts, especially when it heals. But you might be wondering, was justice truly served? Richard sits in federal prison. Millions were recovered. Victims received compensation. But can money replace the lives lost? Can prison time undo 3 years of torture or 15 years of abandonment? Maybe justice isn't just about punishment. Maybe it's about truth finally spoken, evil finally stopped, and broken people learning to heal. Maybe it's about choosing to transform poison into medicine, hatred into wisdom, revenge into redemption. Richard Pemberton thought he was superior. Now he teaches men society abandoned how to read. He thought I was worthless. Now I run a foundation saving lives he once destroyed. He chose hate. I chose love. That's my justice. What would yours be? If this story of justice, family secrets, and redemption touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our next story. We'd love to know, do you think justice was truly served? What would you have done in Aaliyah's position? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know where you're watching from. Whether you're in New York like Aaliyah, across the ocean like Sheikh Abdullah, or anywhere in between, drop your country or city in the comments. It's amazing to see how stories of truth and justice connect us all around the world. Remember, every view, like, and share helps these important stories reach more people. Until next time, choose love, seek truth, and stand for justice.